What's up guys, Chris the Greek Weeb here, and today I have got another Four Knights of the Apocalypse manga review video today. And today we'll be covering chapter 7, called The Demon of Echo Gorge. Before we get into the video, I just want to remind you to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and like the video so I can keep up with all these Four Knights of Apocalypse videos, and I know that you guys would like to keep seeing all these reviews week after week. That way I can keep doing them in a very strict schedule so I can get them out as often as possible. But anyway, a quick recap of Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, we got to see Ironside and Pelgart interact with each other and discussing the likes of Percival and how he is a danger to the whole world according to the prophecy about the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. And we even got clues as to who the Four Knights of the Apocalypse are, while also 100% confirming that Percival is in fact one of them and giving us very concrete hints that Tristan and Lancelot are also members of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, and that all four, this gives us solid information to work on for when we end up getting to see the Four Knights in person outside of Percival. And we also have everyone going towards Leonis because they have to reach Camelot in order to find Ironside and for Percival to in fact learn more about his past. But that's it for the recap. Let's get into Chapter 7 of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. So we start this chapter with Percival, Donnie, and Sin managing to get off of the dragon's backbone by reaching the end. And despite them managing to get a ways away from where Pelgart was and managing to get down from the mountain, this Dragon Skull Bone mountain range, Sin says that there's still a long way to go, and that's when Percival actually comes up with the idea for him and Donnie to try and catch dinner and to make it a competition to see who can get the bigger game. Now this is honestly reminiscent of back in the arc in the Seven Deadly Sins where we met Gowther, where Bon, King, and Meliodas were competing to see who would get the biggest haul for dinner so they could serve at the tavern later that night. So it's honestly a pretty nice callback to this. It's honestly a pretty nice callback to the Seven Deadly Sins. And I like that Percival is the one to actually bring this up, since he has pretty much been hunting all of his life, despite, him only living in one place and only finding like these giant bird monsters and other creatures that just lived on God's finger. So Percival grabs his bow and arrow and starts to go, until Donnie calls him back. And it's then revealed that Donnie actually took Percival's bow and arrow, because as we saw in chapters 2 and 3, Percival cannot use a bow. Every time he shoots it, it somehow manages to curve around and pin him to the ground or hit someone else entirely. At this point, it's not part of his magical power, as far as I know. It's just real shit luck. So Percival is just going to be hunting with his bare hands. He's jumping around trying to find something to hunt as he sees a giant rock fall blocking a path, and he ends up climbing it to see this giant gorge. Percival just runs headfirst right into the gorge because he thinks that there's probably going to be some nice monsters around there, and maybe he'll find something pretty interesting to hunt. Which we actually see in a panel, in the last panel of that nice 2-page spread, which again, another consecutive 2-page spread for this series, right from the beginning. We actually get to see two fairies watching Percival as he is entering the gorge, wondering if that's a human. So it goes to show that there are fairies around now. So are we near the Fairy King's forest? That's actually something that I'm very curious about. We then cut back to Donnie as he is trying to catch a rabbit, but continues to miss. Despite, Percival being the worst shot out of it too, it does show that Donnie is not very equipped to handle a bow, and Sin is more or less antagonizing him, basically calling it like it is, where Donnie just cannot shoot for his life. Donnie then sees a creature that looks like a deer called a roast venison, and he shoots his arrow at it. Unfortunately, he misses, but then he hears a scream, which means his arrow most likely hits something. Him and Sin run towards the scream in order to find out who it is, as they see a giant girl staring at them, wondering what a human is doing here. As we see that the arrow is just a tiny little prick in her arm, and you see her basically worshipping, from what it looks like, a statue of one of the goddess race. Donnie begins to awkwardly apologize as the giant girl says that it's not really much of a big deal. She was praying and it kind of startled her. It doesn't really hurt her. Fox then Sin goes on to say that it is incredibly rare to see a giant of all the races worshipping the goddess race instead of Mother Earth. And before she gets to explain, we actually get her name. It's Dolores. And we see the two fairies that saw Percival go into the gorge, who are named Bob and Knob. Not exactly the most creative names, but they come to ask for her help, as they inform her that a weird human in a helmet has gone into Echo Gorge. We then learn that Dolores was actually the one that sealed up the gorge using a bunch of boulders. And as Sin ends up questioning how fairies are here also, Donnie then comes to the realization that it's most likely Percival, knowing him. He then explains that that the person that they're talking about is their friend Percival, and honestly asking, is the gorge bad? They then begin to explain that long ago, Echo Gorge was a lush and beautiful land populated by both giants and fairies, but now it's considered a living hell. As Donnie gets shocked by this, we actually see a bunch of hellish creatures like a monstrous tree, evil monstrous rabbits, and Percival dealing with them with ease as if they are nothing. So again, showing how strong Percival is in standards of how things are at this current point. Despite him not being stronger than King Arthur's knights, it does go to show that Percival is still a pretty powerful individual, and these monstrous creatures are basically nothing to him. Percival that cheerfully says that this is mostly like heaven, because there are just a bunch of creatures here that he can just take down with ease. As he's saying that, Sin and Donnie will be pretty shocked at how much he managed to find. He then looks over to the side, seeing a little mushroom house that's also carved into the mountainside, as he hears the words, "Help me, please let me go," are said in the distance. We see a tiny fairy, I believe it's a fairy, that is tied to a pole, as someone is interrogating it, asking why did it come here and what does it want, and that nobody comes by the gorge. The fairy says that he was lost, but then we get to see who captured this fairy. It looks like a child in a suit and a hat, saying that he basically goes to say that he'll have the fairy tell him why he's there and have him help with an experiment, saying that this fairy is now a guinea pig for him. As the fairy seems like it's about to cry out, Percival all of a sudden breaks down the door to try and save it. He sees the fairy, saying that he's here to help, but then we see this kid, asking who he is and why he barged into his house, and as we notice, there's a bit of blood on the side of his mouth. What could that mean? That's honestly something that is pretty much kind of miss it if you skim through the chapter moment. But anyway, the fairy says that he is a bad guy and is asking for help, as Percival goes to try and land a hit, but ends up getting tripped by the boy and hits the pole head first in a pretty comedic slapstick comedy way. But then he ends up breaking the rope, tying down this fairy with ease, and the fairy flies out the window. As Percival says that he's never seen a fairy before and that they really exist, and he's all happy and giddy about it, he says he wished he could have shown his grandfather. As he's laughing, it seems like he's starting to lose his energy. We then cut back to Donnie and Sin as they're with Dolores and the two fairies, asking what happened to Echo Gorge, and they said that a demon is doing everything there, and that thanks to him, the trees and animals went crazy. We then cut back to the kid, licking his lips, saying, "You let such a rare guinea pig go? I'll have you replace him, of course." And then we hear that people from the gorge call him Nazianz, the mad herbalist. And that was the end of the chapter. So, another pretty solid chapter for the Four Knights of Apocalypse, I have to say. And I'm not gonna lie, I was not expecting something like this, so quickly. Though I am glad that we're not just going straight to Leonis. It looks like we're going to have a little mini arc before we get there, considering Leonis is supposed to be over 200 miles from where they were. And seeing as how far they've seemingly gotten from where they were on the Dragon's Backbone originally, it seems they got a little bit closer to where they were supposed to go. But this actually brings up some questions and possible theories. Now, these theories I came up with, they're not exactly going to be long enough for their own separate videos, so I'll include them here. But first off, I love that we're getting Percival meeting fairies and giants, and even an actual demon. And the name of this child is called Nazion. He's called a mad herbalist. And apparently, he's a demon. And he destroyed this area where giants and fairies live together. Now, obviously people are going to think that, what if this guy is one of the Four Knights of Apocalypse as well? It could be Destiny or something like that. And that could very well be true. But before I get into that, I just want to say that, what if Dolores is in fact the child of King in the End? That is a possibility, because I don't think we're going to get a random character with such a pretty main cast-like name or memorable name, and a pretty interesting design and characteristic. The fact that she is as far as they know, the only giant, and it's incredibly rare for giants to pray and worship the goddess race, but not Mother Earth. She doesn't go on to explain it, but I feel like we'll learn this later down the road. Honestly, there's basically no evidence supporting this, but it would be nice if that was in fact King in the End's daughter, and Percival meeting her would basically mirror the same way. Will honestly feel kind of nostalgic due to Percival meeting Diane as one of the first sins. So while I don't think Dolores isn't going to be one of the Four Knights, and I don't think, unless it's, I don't know, it's just all speculation at this point. But I really want to get into the fact that Echo Gorge might have actually been a second home to King and Diane. Because as we remember, Bon and Elaine are basically ruling the Fairy King's forest from the Lancelot one-shot. It's and people were calling Bon Fairy King Bon. So it's very possible that King in the End started a whole new kingdom for giants and fairies connected to the Fairy King's forest, but for giants and fairies to live together. It's very possible that this used to be at least maybe a colony or a piece of that new kingdom, but something happened, possibly Nazion's arrival, that caused the place's destruction, possibly while King and the End were away. And with what he did to that area, seemed somewhat irreversible from where people were standing. Now, I don't think, now this isn't 100%, but it would be really nice if all this happened, and this is all very recently, and King and the End were away, and this is what happened to their kingdom, and right now they're trying to make a new home for their people, and then they go back to deal with this demon that's causing all this trouble. But now getting on to Nazion himself. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Please correct me if I am saying it wrong. But anyway, I believe, this is honestly very minuscule, but I think that he might actually be the son of Zeldris and Gilda. And here's why. One nice little clue is that he had blood on the side of his face. He was not hit at all. So it's possible maybe he was sucking the blood from this fairy for his little experiments. There's also the fact that after he seemingly knocked out Percival with almost no real effort, it's possible he used some kind of vampiric hypnosis to knock him out, and maybe the fairy was never let go in the first place. Maybe when he and Percival locked eyes, he basically put him under a bit of hypnosis so he can tie him up and made him think that he freed the fairy. There's also the fact that with the chance of making Percival's guinea pig, he basically licked his lips, so it's very possible that he is in fact half vampire. But they're calling him a demon, so if we take the count that he is that people call him a demon, and that he has very, very subtle hints that he may be a vampire, it fits into the category that he is Zeldris and Gilda's son. And it is very likely that, aside from that, if King and Diane don't have a son and they have a daughter, like it's possible Dolores is, maybe they have multiple kids. But if King and Diane's child is not one of the Four Knights, Zeldris' son could very well be one of the Four Knights. And I think this is a pretty interesting theory, because I honestly really do. It would be interesting for Percival to meet one of the Four Knights that wasn't the child of one of the former sins, but one of their former enemies turned friends. I mean, Zeldris and Meliodas most likely very much rekindled their brotherly bond, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've had some kind of truce or basically fixed a bunch of stuff up in the demon world so that the demons don't cause a crap ton of problems for the humans over these last 16 years after they defeated the Demon King back in the Seven Deadly Sins. But it would be nice because this kid seems kind of off in a way. Almost Merlin-ish in the fact that he is super excited over experiments. Holy crap, could this actually be Merlin's kid? Okay, I'm just gonna stick with Zeldris and Gilda's kid, because as much as that would honestly be nice if it was Merlin's kid, there's also things about Merlin that we all know that would make the fact that if she had a kid, it would honestly be kind of weird with how Merlin actually looks. So I'm not gonna think about it. I am sorry I even brought that up, because that just had a weird image in my head. Ugh. Anyway. But it makes a lot of... You know what? Edit out that part about Merlin's kid. I'm sorry, Tora. I'm really sorry. Edit that part out. I don't know. I was just rambling at that point. But yeah, the fact that this new character could very well be the child of Zeldris and Gilda, it's also backed up with the fact that he almost has a more gothic-like design with the suit he's wearing. We all know that vampires basically even the Seven Deadly Sins, have some sort of gothic design with their clothing. It is a very high possibility, and if he is the first Knight of Apocalypse that Percy will be friends and joins up with, it's very possible that this could be a pretty interesting reunion for Tristan and his cousin, Meliodas and his nephew, and maybe even help convince Tristan to join Percival in their quest to find Ironside and maybe stop these evil royal knights. But yeah, that's more or less my theory. This kid could very well be the child of Zeldris and Gilda and maybe one of the four Knights of Apocalypse. Minor theory, Dolores may be, in fact, the child of King Indian. I don't really think so. There's no evidence supporting it. But it would be honestly kind of a fun thing if Dolores was in fact the child of King Indian. But anyway, that's pretty much it. Another awesome, stellar chapter of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. I cannot wait till next week's chapter. What did you guys think of the events of this chapter? Do you think Nauseam is in fact one of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, the child of Zeldris and Gilda? Do you have any other proof from this chapter that I didn't mention? Do you have any kind of hints from this chapter that I missed that could allude to that? What do you think is Dolores' reason for worshipping the goddess race above Mother Earth? And what do you think really happened at the Gorge? Was Nauseam the real main cause of this incident? Or do you think something else happened and Nauseam just taking the blame for it so we can do all these experiments with the wildlife there? Let me know in the comments down below. And with all that said and done, I hope you guys have an awesome day.